Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by my guest, Ryan Scott. And this is part two of our last episode. This is part two of season four of the podcast. And the purpose of this season is to construct the purpose of this season is to construct an argument for the objective truth of ethics and to point out and to objectively discuss the concept of evil. And I know that sounds like a grandiose goal, but that's what we do here at the podcast. So anyone who disagrees, come at me, bro. Uh, and so in the last episode, we were focusing on the ideas of language and identity, and the idea that the claim that people make that you're not allowed to disagree with someone's self-identification unless you're to be called like a bad person, like you've done something morally wrong by disagreeing with somebody's self-identification. And we make the argument that that is of course absurd, because language itself is, for language to work, there must be a distribution of concepts among all of those in the conversation that have meaning independent of people's feelings, so that when we use the words to communicate, they program your mind in a specific location in the space of concepts. And so to be able to do that, the words have to have objective meaning independent of people's feelings that allows one to call balls and strikes, or to say this is consistent with a label, or this is consistent with a label, or a word, or this is not consistent. So for example, being a UFC fighter requires you to have fought for the organization Ultimate Fighting Championship, or to be currently fighting for the organization Ultimate Fighting Championship. And anyone who says I identify as a UFC fighter who does not do those things, you have the right to say no, no, you're not. And otherwise, those words have no meaning and don't have the capacity to discriminate. So the whole point to information is that information allows you, like, information creates a border, and everything that is consistent with the provided information is inside the border, and everything that's not consistent is excluded. And the things inside the border are the things that is are the things that can create a miscommunication, because you meant this right here, but they understood it as that. But because I gave the information, because of the information provided, you couldn't distinguish one from the other. So this is the concept of entropy. And so the whole point is that information functions as a thing that excludes some things and includes other things, which means that if someone comes to you and says that they're an X, you can uh, assess their claim to where the label points on the network of shared concepts, and if it doesn't align, you have the right to say no. And that's where we left off before. And so in this episode, so just to recap, the point of, like I said, the point of this entire season is to talk about evil, but to do that, we must understand the concepts of identity before we understand the ideas of ethics and how ethical responsibility and behavior is related to preservation of relationships, which is related to the preservation of identity. And so given that setup, today we want to talk about
Well, sure.
identity in a formal construction, where I like to talk about it in terms of macro identities and micro identities, which is associated with macro states and micro states in thermophysics. And I like to discuss the concept of identity in terms of one's spirit, where spirit can be determined by how someone programs the universe and how they're programmed by the universe. In other words, it's how do you respond to an interaction? How do you create reality? As a physicist, I can create works of art that are consistent with someone who has studied physics for 20,000 hours that someone who hasn't done that cannot do. Therefore, I have embodied that spirit. And these ideas are at what I call meta level zero, because you can take something like my computer code that I've written to write the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm. You can look at the code, you can run it, you can see what it produces, and you can go, oh, I couldn't have done that. Only someone who has the spirit of a computer programming mathematician physicist could have made this. And so you can verify people by their works, as the Bible would suggest. You know them by their works. And so yeah, Ryan, you want to add anything to that, or got
Um,
anything to say?
no, I mean, I think that you summarized it greatly. The only thing I would say here is I hope you don't mind that I give a shameless plug.
Oh, go for it, man. You you're doing me a favor, so you can
Right.
shamelessly plug whatever you want.
Uh, yeah, so I think that our discussion today regarding identity is actually going to be very closely related to those series of lectures that I gave on the notion of the role of truth in Christianity.
Okay.
And specifically, there's a lecture that I put together called Realizing Your God-Given Name or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, in that short series that people can find on my YouTube channel, which is called An American Analytic.
Okay. We
Uh,
can put a link. We can put a link in the
yeah,
description of the
yeah, that
episode.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that specific, I think that specific lecture would pair with this conversation that we're going to have very nicely, because
Mm.
is a short sketch of the idea is essentially argue that um, to understand yourself as you are, and so consequently, based on the conclusions that we're going to draw here, in order to act in a way that's maximally ethically, you have to consult that which you are inside yourself, and I point to that thing as the name which God has given to you.
Oh man.
Um, cool. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. We'll have to edit that out, obviously.
Okay.
uh,
So let me just say
you're summarizing your shameless plug.
right, yeah. So the gist of the idea is that God has given to us a structure that we genuinely are. This is also Jung's idea of individuation, the notion of the
Yes.
self. Okay.
Yes.
And the thing that we really are is given to us by means of our name. And I argue essentially, I think that in the wake of the conclusion that we're going to draw here is essentially going to be that what it means to act maximally ethically is to be in um, as much alignment or conformity to that which God has given to you as is possible.
Ooh, yeah, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So your name, he gives you your name. Your name has a bunch of implications for what it is, what it means for you to be.
Hmm.
And your goal is to turn yourself into that thing at all moments. And
Yes.
that's what it is to behave ethically.
All right. And I think that that's a perfect place to start with the idea of how I conceptualize archetypes or macro identities.
So let's be,
And
so let, so if you use the word archetype, do you mean that in the technical sense or do you mean it as an intuitive object?
as an intuitive, no, it's definitely an intuitive object that I know you are going to correct me to make it more technical, but this is where my mind thinks of, and I would like for you to give me the technical definition and see whether or not there's sufficient overlap, because my guess is that I'm using it more loosely to only represent a given identity that can be shared by many individuals. And so, for example, a macro, like for a macro state or a macro identity, there's something like you're a physicist, I'm a physicist. So we both have that macro identity, but the specific information that points to you versus me makes us micro states of that identity. And so I think that in some instances that'll probably align with the concept of archetype. For instance, if someone is a hero, then versus a villain or something like that. If someone is a hero, I think that that would probably would that be considered a Jungian archetype?
Well,
Or
the technical definition of an archetype is something like universal or collective or shared modes of apprehending reality psychologically,
oh, okay,
whose
that's not that. Yeah,
whose nature cannot be specified any more completely than by means of something called a symbol. So,
okay, that doesn't sound too off from
yeah,
where.
the only difference
Um,
is that by definition they're unconscious. So, like
okay,
they're
yeah,
the substance which makes them up cannot be exhausted, right? So all
okay.
you can do, the best that you can do is exhibit facets of it. And the way that emerges is you'll have like imagine you have a dream where you are the hero or a hero emerges in your dream.
Hmm.
You don't know, I mean, you know viscerally in the moment that the thing is a hero, but you don't think the thought, this is the hero. No,
Yeah.
you have a bunch of natural affective associations with it, and then later, when you analyze the dream, you realize this is a hero archetype or a symbol of the hero, is really what I should say. So when the immediate presentation occurs, that's a symbolic presentation of the archetype, right?
Okay.
So it's like your elementary conception of the archetype as mediated by your emotional structure that is you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if we were to try and understand the archetype as such, we would have to um, universally quantify. What we would need to do is take everyone's version of that thing and then build a thing over all of those things. And even that, excuse me, will be incomplete
Yeah.
because you would need to do that for all people for all time in order to get the exact thing.
Okay. Yeah. No. Actually, you know what? I love my intuition because this is actually pretty damn close
Yes.
to what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't. I honestly, the probably the biggest difference is the idea that it has to be unconscious. But there is something related to the idea of what is a democratic, almost a democratic process
Yeah, it's a
of
object.
identifying, yeah, of identifying. And I think that it's democratic in the sense where I'm talking about the idea of archetype, or and I'll use for myself macro identity or
Good.
macro state.
Yeah,
And the macro state is simply an identity that someone can have that other people also have.
yeah. This is like
And
the notion of physicist, for example.
yeah, notion of physicist, notion of comedian, notion of whatever. Like there is some spirit that can be embodied, and and again, spirit is associated with how one programs the universe, and how they're programmed by the universe. And so, and those spirits are usually embodied through some sort of dedication or experience. So to become a scientist, I had to study for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, which
Sure.
means that to come into relationship with that spirit, I had to sacrifice my uncomfortability and my freedom, essentially, to dedicate all those hours to come into relationship. And it's something like when you come into relationship with a possible spirit that you can embody, you can know about the depth of that spirit based off of how much it demands of you, and how long you're able to obey its rules to maintain a relationship with it, such that you can come to understand it enough that you can enact its will. And
Yeah,
so
you become
whenever,
of it.
huh?
You become a disciple of it in a way.
You become a disciple of it, yeah. And I like to think of it in terms of what's that?
Or an apprentice.
Or an apprentice, or one way that I think about it is a
You don't
shard.
want to
It
be,
made
we
made
don't
in
want
the
to be idolaters. I mean, I don't want to be an idolater, so apprentice rather than disciple.
oh well that's the thing is but here's the thing, like you were talking about the name that God gave you and how that's associated with this. And so what I'm saying is think of each one of these macro identities um as being like you can go into a pure relationship with these identities.
Yeah.
And that pure relationship goes with, like I was saying, like think of a referee who has been given power by an athletic commission to officiate a mixed martial arts fight, because I like UFC and mixed martial arts. And when they go and they do that refereeing, they don't go in there thinking, man, I really like John Jones. I'm a John Jones fan, so I'm going to referee this fight to give him favor because that's what I want to happen. It's like, no, you sacrifice your own personal desires and needs to enact the will of the commission through the power they gave to you. And through that, you are embodying a pure relationship with the spirit of the referee.
Yeah.
And that would be your goal.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, when you're talking about your name, you can think of your name as being a pointer in the space of all spirits, where every macro identity is an intersection of all your macro identities. So for each macro identity, you can start off with, say, American. So if you can imagine that you're starting off and you're trying to identify a person and you say American. So you've taken the space of all people you could be thinking about, and now it's narrowed down to just Americans. And then you say African American. So you take all Americans, it goes down to African American. So every time you add an extra label that points to your spirit, you're giving higher resolution data and you're zooming in on a particular individual. And so when you're talking about trying to become what God has labeled you by your name, then what you want is to have an ethical relationship with all of the macro identities that make up your identity. And if everybody else, so if everybody else
Sure, sure.
within each macro identity is doing the same, then what you have is a almost like an immediate unfurling of ethics, just like emerging out from all of the people in relationship, because there's going to be all these different intersections.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, this would be your notion of purifying the space in the sense, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes. Yes. Yes.
right, because as soon as you choose to adopt the true expression of the conjunction of all of these spirits, then you faithfully represent these spirits in the world. And then the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to build a realm in which everyone does this
Yes.
so that these spirits are represented as faithfully as we are capable of representing them.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
then
Yep.
and then
That's
this
it.
is exactly what it means to be ethical.
Yes. Yep. 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 Um. It's funny because we could go into the ethical arguments. But honestly, I think that
Hold on.
what
Maybe we should make a so there's actually a very, very important corollary that maybe we should point out as a consequence.
go
And
for it.
that is that if that's what it means to behave in a maximally ethical way, then to behave minimally ethically is to be of the sort where your goal is to attempt to identify with a particular spirit without doing the construction that is necessary to be able to faithfully represent it. Right?
Exactly.
As soon as you try to take on an identity that you don't have the capacity to actually channel,
Yeah.
then you become a like a perverter of the spirit, or you what's the word I'm thinking of? Um,
Wolf in sheep's clothing, essentially.
yeah, I'm thinking of a particular word.
Well,
Anyways, it doesn't matter. The point is that there are some very important examples. For example, anyone in the academy who plagiarizes work
yes,
is going to be
exactly.
somebody who is going to
Or
be
makes up data.
so right.
That's
So
the
like I
one.
don't maybe a prominent person that got demoted from a prominent university's presidency
Talking
recently.
about Stanford. Was it Stanford?
No, it wasn't Stanford. It was
Oh,
one in
okay, okay.
Boston.
Oh, yeah, Harvard. Yeah, yes, I forgot. Yeah. No, I know there's this guy I follow on YouTube who covers academia and plagiarism and stuff like that. And if there's some prominent professor at Stanford who's also getting a lot of crap, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And so anytime anyone takes up a position where they um like you can put it this way, like anyone who hasn't done the work to actually become the thing
yes,
has no right to lay claim to being the thing,
exactly.
right?
And
But
yeah,
but as soon
people who have done the work, but then at some point in time decide to act selfishly into like they've earned the reputation, and because they've earned reputation, they've been let deeper into the sanctum.
and then they become
Been
by the devil, and then yeah, right. Um,
yeah, or even
um,
worse.
yeah. No. Is it possible to be worse than tempted by the devil?
Uh, well, I mean, if you are completely useless in your ability to enact, like in other words, you can't get into the inner doors of any sanctum
Yeah.
whatsoever, then
Yeah. So,
it
so,
just
so this is actually a really good. Sorry. So this is actually a really good tangent that I'm curious. Maybe we can explore just a little bit, which
yeah,
is
man.
so anybody who feigns to represent faithfully a particular spirit is obviously unethical in the sense that we're defining here.
Yes,
But you also mentioned in that last section that another way in which you can behave unethically is to identify yourself with a spirit so that you are allowed to know truths which are deeper than most.
Hmm.
And then you turn around and shut the doors as though you are the only individual allowed in that realm.
Oh, that's part of it. Yes, it's
But
not.
so
Yeah.
this is interesting, right? Because it means that another way you can behave unethically is to suppose that um that to know the depth to so we've already so great. This means that each spirit is actually infinitely deep. And if you suppose in your finite knowledge that you've known the bottom of the spirit, and then you act so arrogantly as to shut off continued growth of the spirit, it's also a type of unethical behavior.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
For sure. I mean, there's so many ways to be unethical. I think one of the ones you just pointed out is going into the inner sanctums and then shutting other people off. Is one. Another one is going into the inner sanctum, becoming corrupted, and then defiling it. This is one of the worst ones, in my opinion. It is to like an identity can gain
Those are the
clout.
same thing. I should say, I think that
Mm.
those things are the same thing, right? Because basically, if you shut everyone else out, you basically say, I'm the only individual who has the capacity or who is allowed to know this thing,
Well,
right?
that's one part, but you could still act like you could do that and still act in a way that's in accordance with the will of that thing. You just have a really narcissistic view. Like you think that
Yeah.
basically it is wait. It is
Okay.
to have a God complex to say that I am God, like
Yes.
I am this thing. But
That
then there
also
but then to
forces
but
desegregation, doesn't it? I mean, it forces a
what but
defilement, doesn't it?
well it is a kind of defilement, but I
Right.
think
Exactly.
there's another kind of defilement where you put on the mask, go in there, and then start proclaiming that I'm acting in the way of the
Yes.
spirit
Yes. Yes.
while doing the exact opposite. And then everyone else in the world is watching you do this and they're thinking, that's not the thing. Like what is this? And then you're taking it and you're degrading it and crumbling it from inside, or even worse, you're turning people against the spirit. I think that Jesus
Yeah.
says something like that, like people who corrupt a child or something like
Yep.
that.
That's
Like
yep.
so
He
or
does.
who
He
people
does.
who
He hung around their neck.
yeah.
He says something
Or
like
people
he.
who corrupt I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's like people who corrupt people's relationship with God or who act as priests, and instead of doing the will of God, they do their own will and insert the
Touching.
ideas of modernity. Yeah, they insert the ideas of modernity, the wisdom of the day as the eternal wisdom. Huh?
I said, I asked for God's intercession to forgive my sin for making a joke about horrible things that people in his church have done.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, but I think that largely the corruption that you can do to degrade the spirit, because breaking it down physically, so like in this podcast I'm always starting off with like meta level zero data, which
Yeah,
is data that anyone can observe. So the meta level zero data in terms of spirits that you embody, or identities that you have to do with how you program the universe. You know can you do a backflip? Are you a gymnast? You can observe the work, you can observe someone's fruits, and how they program reality to know what spirits they embody. And so, with that being said, humanity, when we go out and we start just creating a body of knowledge of like physics or something like that, um, we are taking something that exists before we discovered it, and then we're pulling it from the eternal spirits that can be embodied, and we're manifesting like a physical form through this um, knowledge and the knowledge that has been constructed around the topic and all of the data stored on all the individuals who have come into relationship with that knowledge. And so that's something like a representation of that spirit in the physical.
yeah,
And when someone and so that requires stewardship. That requires the individuals who have been given trust. And that's a core part of corruption is and unethical behavior is trust. The more you elevate yourself, the more you climb the hierarchy of this spirit, the more trust you have. And so to actually break that trust, the deeper you're in, that's true evil.
right, right.
Um
No, so
yeah,
that's
and and then what that does is it degrades the quality. So once you're inside, once you've been given trust and you're inside and you start doing Weasley things because you have this other identity and you're elevating that identity above the ones that have been giving you trust, and then you start having it act as the head. Start having it act in ways that are inconsistent with its nature.
Yeah.
And it just starts making the whole world, that whole identity die. It's like it is the thing that leads to death or decay, and it is sin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that, I mean, I think that's exactly why Dante made the ninth circle betrayal, right? It's because
Mm,
uh I mean, that's what's going on there, right? Is you are betraying the sacred thing that you've been endowed with when
yeah,
you go into, like, when you go into where the altar is and you start burning it,
yeah,
you know, it,
yep,
like,
yep.
you've betrayed something very deep.
Yeah,
So that,
you've betrayed everyone's trust. I mean, and so um, this idea of archetypes, or these macro data, or this macro identity, it's also associated with the concept of information. In that, like we said, what is the function of information? Think of it as a vector in the space of concepts that's pointing you over here versus over there. And so each one of these identities is creating a pointing you in a direction in the space of spirits, essentially. Um, and so there is a way to think of these macro data as constraints. They are constraints, and and as a constraint, it's like you think of it in terms of thermophysics. You want to maintain a system. You want to like isolate it. You want to insulate it, right? And so so whenever you have two systems and they're insulated from each other, then they can maintain the state. But once they start interacting, they start exchanging energy and information, and then you get a new configuration. And so that, think of that allowing them to interact, like pulling down a border. And so, with all of these identities, to embody them, you have to follow their rules
yeah,
to be able to embody them.
yeah,
And what that means is that if there is a rule, there is a constraint, and to not follow the rule is to start degrading that spirit. It's to change your vector in the space of spirit from one location to the other. It's to drift. And so, part of your own identity is the responsibility to exclude other opinions and identities, like exclude things that aren't consistent with what you find sacred. So this starts to come down to the idea of what you worship and what you find sacred. And there's a degree to which what you worship is associated with the configuration that has been manifested within yourself that allows you to embody that spirit. Um, and so what I'm trying to get at is, this is the notion of conservatism. Like, to conserve a state is to try to isolate it, or to act in a way accordance with the values associated with that spirit, so that so that it can maintain its existence, and so that it can continue to live and exist.
yeah. So um something that I think would be interesting to tease out a little bit there that I noticed based on what you were saying.
Yeah,
Okay, good. Sorry, I thought we were having the connection issue again, but it seems to be okay.
yeah, we're good.
Uh, so um so there are two pieces, so if we think about things according to, like, say, personality psychology or even just analytical psychology, in both situations, one deduces the existence of something called orientation. I mean, I
Mm.
call it orientation. They don't call it that. They call it, and now it's called extroversion, which is, don't get me started. um, or
Well, if you need to go on a rant, then
Yeah,
you have the freedom to
I
do
mean,
so.
the fact that it's called extroversion just proves the degree to which the extroverts have had their hand in labeling the system. And
Mm.
this is because the way that people conventionally understand extroversion and introversion is how extroverts would understand orientation. If
Okay.
one is introverted, one understands orientation in a manner which isn't readily expressible in an invariant way in the way that science typically demands, because
Yeah.
an introvert understands that his life is governed by his internal objects, but it's very difficult to express that in a way that can be measured.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter. The point here is that there seems to me to be, back in that observation that you made about breaking the rules that govern a particular spirit as a corruption
Yeah.
of the spirit. Now, I think that that's true, but I want to tease that apart a little bit, because I think that,
It's not a corruption. I mean, it may or may not be corrupt. I mean,
no, I mean,
It is.
hold
It
on,
is.
hold on, hold on.
If thing starts to die, like you said, the
No,
orientation, the vector starts to
right.
change.
I
Yeah.
think so. Okay, yeah, right. So the reason why I'm making this distinction is because I think that the phrasing that it starts to die is the right way to look at it from an
Hmm.
introverted point of view, because it basically means that, like you're alluding to, you essentially are rotating the direction of the vector that you're pointing in. So you're rotating it away from the eigenstate that points in the direction of the particular spirit, and you start
Yes.
rotating it into the direction of something else.
Yes.
Now,
Yes. Yes.
but you can also call it a corruption to the degree that you are supposed to be a steward for it in the world,
Hmm.
right? Because then people think, well, you're a physicist, but I see that you're behaving in a way that's not maximally ethically in the way that we're trying to define it here, right?
Yes.
Which incidentally ends up leading to a different problem. So let me get into that in a second,
Yep.
right? But excuse me, this separation between how it's experienced internally as a death of the spirit because you are rotating yourself away from its true law,
Yeah.
and as an expression of corruption out in the world because you are making everybody else think that this is what it means to be this thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So it's actually kind of interesting now, because the way that we initially proposed to define ethical is the degree to which you adhere to the law of the thing. But suppose we needed to, now, if you are Christian, then you suppose that you can intuit the nature of that law by consultation of your conscience, basically.
Hmm.
And in part, that's based on a particular verse, I think in Ezekiel, uh, which says that I will remove your heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. Um, People can look it up. But
Hmm.
if we were to try and deduce the nature of ethical behavior in an extroverted way, as in, how do we judge when an individual begins to behave
Yes.
in a way which is corrupting of a particular spirit, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because you can imagine this situation, right? Imagine I was raised, for example, in the jungle or something like that, but it is in my nature that I'm supposed to be a physicist or something like this, right?
Hmm.
Then somehow, when I'm 18, some wonderful people come and save me from my insanity and put me down in the realm.
Yeah.
And then I observe among my peers who behave as physicists that they all plagiarize each other.
Yeah.
And I come to believe that it's just a natural cultural or collective or social expression of the spirit
Yeah.
of being a physicist that we should be that we should be plagiarizing each other. Now,
Yeah.
if we sit down and think a little bit about what it means to plagiarize and why that would be a bad idea, it's really easy to see how the long-term consequences of something that extreme is bad. But if we're talking about something more subtle, it becomes harder to understand whether or not a particular behavior is a corrupting or a purifying influence on the social expression of the spirit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so what do you think about that? How do you think that we should judge whether or not a given action um, brings us either closer or farther alignment from a particular
From
spirit?
the. Hmm. So first, I think that there needs to be. Um, it's almost like you first need something like a coherent language, so that you
Okay.
know what like when you because the spirit is like essentially there's a label that says I'm this spirit versus that spirit, and then I think from that coherent language, you get something like a relationship between all, and I know you don't like using the word symbol, but all labels within that language. So each label is pointing at a spirit. And so you're asking yourself, what is this spirit? And you can look at it in terms of its
Mm,
relationship to other spirits in the language. And from there you can get something, you can get a notion of how that thing should be. Um and so from that, if someone's using a coherent language about what a scientist is or a physicist is, and then everyone's acting in a corrupted way, if the language that is being used to point at physicists, I think is not corrupted, then you can see that these vectors aren't lined up with each other.
yeah. Okay. So
So
so hold on.
so from yeah
Let me make an important observation.
yeah
Um, so I think part of our goal here is to. So let me ask you this: are we taking for granted the existence of objectivity, or are we trying to prove objectivity before we prove the existence of objective ethic?
I think hold on. So objective ethic.
So objective ethic
Hold
is,
on, wait.
yeah, go ahead.
So the way that I think about it is you have language, and from language you have to have some notion of objectivity, which is
Good,
to say
good,
that
good, good,
you
good.
need to have you need to have some
Yes,
capacity to where everyone agrees on what a label
yes,
means.
good. Right.
Yeah.
So that means that we are making the existence of an objective ethic contingent upon the existence of a coherent language, and a
Yes.
coherent language is contingent upon the notion of objectivity per se. And so
Because the
there's
oh okay
so let me just finish, okay?
yeah
So that's true, and I know why, but we are not trying to prove the fact of objectivity. I mean, that would be a contradiction in terms because you're trying to prove the objectivity of objectivity per se, which is absurd. Like
yeah
you
we're not
can't.
trying to prove
No, no,
objectivity.
no. Right. So instead, what we're doing is we're taking it as granted that objectivity is, and we indicate what we mean by objectivity. For example, by the example that you like to bring up a lot, which is I can tell you a secret,
Yes.
and if you choose to share it among the world, then I will know that you changed the state of things. Or like if you don't choose to change to share the secret, for example,
Well,
like
it's like if you tell a secret, and I know that you can carry it into another room and tell someone that secret, which means that it had to have been encoded
yeah,
in you like a memory card, and so
yeah,
there
right.
has to be some degree to which when I'm communicating to you and people are understanding what we're saying, that I am programming you objectively, like programming a computer.
Exactly. Yeah, and so good. No, this is good. Like this is
Yeah.
I think is actually a very very important part of the argument because
Yes.
for us to make the claim that there is an objective ethic, it means that we can. I mean, so there's going to be some uncertainty within the realm of objectivity by virtue of the fact that we cannot purify nature like to the point.
Well, yeah. It's like you to make
You can only make
a
it so pure.
language, huh?
You can only make it so pure. But
Well, it's not necessarily purity. It has to do with precision as well. So so purity has to do with whether or not the language is logically sound in it's like logically sound and like
yeah, sure.
there's a consistent relationship
Yeah,
between
sure.
labels.
Yeah, sure, sure.
And then if it's low resolution, it can only resolve a concept to a certain degree. So you want to
Yeah,
have a
sure.
pure system with high resolution, and then the
Yeah, sure, sure.
resolution depends on the
Yeah,
number
sure,
of
sure.
labels and yeah.
Yeah, sure, sure.
And so
But
yeah
the reason why it's important to acknowledge there's some inherent uncertainty is uh, because it means that we are arguing for the existence of objective ethic to the degree that we have the capability to do so. Now, that I don't think that this nullifies any of our arguments because it just means that people are maximally ethical stewards of their spirit to the degree that they can understand the law that governs the spirit, right? So
yes
that means that and that means that people can be as ethical as they possibly can be, and it doesn't require you to have as much precision or as little precision as someone else, right? It means
Yes.
that the relationship is
Yes.
fundamentally characterized between you and the spirit, right?
Yes.
And so if your diameter of precision is 1 meter and my diameter of precision is a nanometer, it doesn't mean that you are more or less ethical than I am. It just means
Correct.
that I can resolve things to a finer degree. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that it means that I have more responsibility in
Yes.
that
Yes.
situation.
You're closer in the inner sanctum. Yes.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly right. Right. This is
You're
why we
higher. You're higher on the hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly right. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the capacity to behave in a maximally ethical way. It just means that I wouldn't expect you to be able to resolve energy levels at the scale of a nanometer. I would expect you to
Yes.
be able to resolve energy, well, I mean, inverse nanometers, right?
What you expect, no, regardless of your level of precision and understanding of the spirit, what you expect is sincerity.
Yeah,
That's what it requires. It
right.
requires you to say. It requires you to say, I want to embody the spirit. I want to be a Christian. I want to be a scientist. What do I have to do to be a scientist? And when you first start off, you're not going to have a deep understanding, but there's most likely going to be people who have already paved the way. That structure is going to exist in society in which there are people with authority and responsibility to guide new people who want to join in that spirit. And what you essentially create is the spirit itself exists in all individuals who embody it or who are stewards of it. So if you are a neophyte, you are just as equal and valuable to that spirit as if you're at the top of the hierarchy.
Yes.
And what that, because it is the fact that
Your
you
responsibility.
guys are, huh,
The,
well, it's the fact that both of you guys have, both people have entered into a relationship with the spirit that then gives it life. And so for the realm of that spirit to continue to exist, everyone needs to behave maximally ethically and sincerely to each other, no matter what level they're at.
yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. And I think that that's an that um I think that that's an absolutely essential thing that we need to illustrate because if it like one could naively interpret the nature of this conversation to be that you need to be like it could be that we are proposing that there's an objective hierarchy with respect to resolving the spirit, which means that people who can resolve it at a finer level are more ethical, but we are
Or
not
more
making
responsible. Yeah, we're not making that.
no no
Yes,
no
yes.
more responsible is true, more
Yes.
ethical is false, right?
Yes, correct.
We're saying each individual has each individual has the responsibility to be as aligned with the things that characterize him as it is possible for him to be. Like he
Mm-hmm.
must be as aligned with the thing as it is possible for him to be. There are some
Correct.
people who are called to go dig a hole in the middle of the desert and meditate for 2 weeks, and there are a lot of people that aren't. And the
Yes.
people that aren't called to go and do that don't need to do it, and they're not any less ethical insofar as they are maintaining an honest and sincere relationship with the spirits that characterize their life.
And in this point, I want you to interject because you explained to me once Jung's idea of actualization, and it was an observation. Oh, individualization,
Yeah, yeah,
and you said that it was due to people in his practice that would show up and their lives would have fallen apart, and they were trying to put it back together.
yeah,
So if you could, because you keep using the term called to do, called, and I think that from my understanding that was informed by your understanding of Jung. So if you want to explain
yeah.
that to the
I
audience.
mean, I would say that informed by a comparative analysis of Jung's idea of individuation with the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so um, there's a beautiful passage. There are many beautiful passages in the Bible, obviously, but
Yeah.
there's a beautiful passage I think in Matthew, and I think it's 16:24 or something like that. Matthew 16:24. You can look it up.
Yep.
Where Christ says something like, "Pick up your cross and follow me," right? And so what he's calling us to do is to, I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time, where he says something like, "Go find the heaviest thing you can carry and pick that up, and that's your life." Like
Yeah.
on the maximum amount of responsibility. But I
Yep.
think secretly what he's actually saying in that is align yourself with that which you are to the degree that you have the capacity to do that. Like
Yes.
align yourself as much as you can with to the degree that you have the capacity to do something like that, right?
Yeah.
But this is exactly what Jung's notion of individuation is. Jung's notion of individuation, I mean, you can think about it as individuation is the process of becoming an individual, which means the process of becoming who you are and not someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in some sense, what you do is you purge yourself of all of the things that are in your mind that are little parrots of someone else's
Yeah.
idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that you don't believe things that other people believe. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that really it's something much more like you adopt the responsibility of judging the thoughts that are in your mind and you keep the things that you think are true.
And I think to make this even more clear, it is related to your muse. Think of it as your
Yeah,
muse.
yeah, yeah,
Think of it as like one thing I tell people all the time is that I got into physics and math for several reasons. One of those reasons is when I was younger and I would see math texts and I would see all these symbols, all these exotic, complicated symbols. I had no idea what they meant, but they were aesthetically beautiful to me,
yeah,
and it really was like I have no idea, but this is beautiful to me. I don't know why, and that was, and I gravitated toward it. Another reason why is when I was 15, I had physical science class with Mr. Schmidt. He's my high school physics teacher, and I remember when I was in the class, it was an hour and a half class, and it felt like I was in there for 15, 20 minutes because when he was talking, I was so enamored with the content and what was being said that time felt like it flew by. And I was like, holy crap. And it was the realization that I was that that I was that consumed with the topic while I was there that made me go, oh, I should probably do this.
yeah,
And so it really is like this call is to try to remove the chatter in your mind, quiet it, and listen as sincerely as you can to the things that are speaking to you like your muse that compel you to take action and then follow that.
yeah. That's right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right. Yeah, and so I should say a few things. The first thing I would say is that it's neither obvious nor is it easy to do something like that. It's always insanely difficult. And the
Mm-hmm.
people who hear those things very loudly are actually very blessed. Um,
Yeah.
I'm incredibly blessed in that regard because uh, for literally since I can remember, I've woken up in the morning and I've just uh, like somehow understood my nature. Now
Mm. I thought you were gonna say you wake up in the morning and start doing calculations.
no, no. It took some time to get,
Since 4 years
but
old, man, I just couldn't
no,
get
no,
that I had to do that algebra.
no. Now I'm very blessed in that way. Now, I, um, I would say that uh, I'm bad at that. I can always be better at that. I
Yeah.
don't. I've never been. I would never. I don't claim to be the greatest steward of my soul that there ever has been. I certainly am
Yeah.
not. But I am very blessed in regards to the fact that it's always been a very central and prominent figure in my life specifically.
You have a
Uh,
direction. You know, you
yeah,
you have a direction. You're not lost. You at the very least you know that you should be moving in this direction. Whether or not you're doing it with the expedience that you should be
right,
doing it with
yeah,
is a
yeah.
different question.
Yes, and I've
Yeah.
never given up on that thing, and I've suffered immensely in its name, and it's been worth it, and I would do it a million times over.
Yep.
But
Same here. Well, one thing I do want to point out is that, like I said, I don't know if I said that in this recording or the previous one, but part of the reason why I've come back to Christianity because I was raised Christian was that I was raised Christian. I became an atheist in college, and then throughout grad school, when I was getting my PhD, I was an atheist, and then I came back to God shortly after when I became an information theorist or a quantum information theorist.
yeah,
And in that time when I was an atheist, I told myself that I worshipped reason, logic, and science and truth.
yeah,
And for me, it was I sacrificed everything to that. If something wasn't in accordance with that,
yeah,
it was completely allowed to be purged. I did not care about it,
yeah,
and in doing so, I formed a relationship with the spirit of truth, such that when I started reading the Bible, it was like I see myself. I see myself in this. And this is something that's really important with this archetypal, with these not archetypes, but these macro identities. It is the capacity to say that that is me. I am that thing. And so, and this is going to sound crazy, but when I look at like the construction of the atomic bomb, and I look at stuff, I look at videos and history of that, I think to myself, I did that. And that sounds crazy, but that depends on what you're allowing to speak for you.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
this is something that, and unless you have an experience, I guess one of the best ways to kind of understand this is, I remember I was in grad school once and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I remember staring at the mirror and thinking, who is that? That's not me. And it's like there's this discordance with like, what is this thing looking back at me, kind of like in Neon Genesis Evangelion when, yeah. All right, so sorry about the technical difficulties. I was leaving off with the idea of Neon Genesis Evangelion, where Shinji is inside the Evangelion after first piloting it. He looks at the building next to him, and he sees the Ava's eye looking back at him. And there's this discordance because it's him, but it's not him. And I think that's part of what emerges when you start identifying with the macro identity, and you start, because if you listen to some of my episodes of the podcast, like Purity in the Void, like I'm saying stuff like, I am the spirit of Cactus, I am that spirit. And it has to do with how deep your relationship is with that spirit, how what your precision, like how loyal have you been, how long have you sacrificed to it, how sincere are you in that you want to act in the world in accordance with its will, so that you're creating its art on its behalf and you're sacrificing your identity to enact its will. And there's a deep part of this idea of relationship. Like, this is actually really important to the idea of ethics and relationship, is the sacrifice of yourself to enter into the relationship, not only with the spirit that you're trying to conjure into existence, but all the other people who have made the sacrifice to conjure that spirit into existence. And this is what I would consider this social contract, is to give up some of your personal sovereignty to into a contract with the spirit of the lowercase g god and all those who have also, because that's where you follow the rules. You To follow the contract is to follow the rules, is to act ethically and sincerely to all those who come together to make that world. And that's the sense in which I think we are made in the image of God, um or that we're shards or reflections of God. Each person in that contract, in that relationship, is reflecting an aspect of the spirit.
Oh, oh, yes. Okay.
So the neophyte and the person at the top of the hierarchy are both manifestations of that spirit, and as such they are equals. Because, and they're equals in the sense that the neophyte has to ask themselves the question, what do I have to do to be maximally ethical to all the people that I entered into the contract with? And so does the person at the top of the hierarchy. And so in that sense, the sacrificing of your personal identity to be aligned with that higher spirit, something greater than yourself, is the way in which you make yourself equal with all of those who enter into the spirit.
Yeah, I think that's right. Right. So like, because essentially what you're doing when you enter into that relationship is you agree to subordinate yourself to the rules that characterize the spirit itself,
Yep.
which is exactly the reason why the, like, in this sense, the Pope and the neophyte are equal.
Yes.
But it's not that there isn't hierarchy, it's that uh we both agree to submit ourselves to the will of God as he has revealed himself to us.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and of
and
course,
and the degree to which the people, and so for the neophyte, the degree to which the people who are the stewards of that spirit have maintained a pure, sincere
yeah,
relationship with it is the degree to which observing from them how to act is the
yeah,
correct thing to do.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why that's why when you so the thing so I brought up earlier that sometimes like we need to be careful because we need to discern when something has been corrupted.
Yeah.
And I do think that if you embrace the process of individuation, you will realize that in that you have a natural intuition for what the appropriate expression of the spirit is.
Hmm.
And you can use that to discern whether or not the current iteration is a sufficient presentation of the spirit.
Yeah.
And uh, consequently, you might find that the spirit, the contemporary spirit in its expression is so far corrupted that you realize you need to construct the thing on your own.
Yes, yes, yes.
Um,
And also I would say that that ability to have that innate understanding to know what the relationship is with the spirit requires a purity, a sincerity. And so there is a degree to which you have a relationship with the spirit of truth, that muse thing. It's almost like there is a muse. There is something speaking to you from the void.
yeah,
And so there is huh?
that is your soul.
Yes, 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 and it's communicating to you, and there is in that communication, think there is like a mediation. There's like a discontinuity between it and you, and that
Yeah,
at that point of discontinuity, there can be corruption, and so you need to purify the basically the
yeah,
channel of communication. Think of it that as a channel of communication. You need to purify that thing and think about intergenerational trauma. If someone acts unethically now
yeah,
and lives in a state that's a hell state in which they're just maximally unethical, they're lying to themselves all the time, they're delusional, they're always they can't, they have a huge shadow that they can never incorporate to themselves, they're afraid to look at who they really are, then they
yeah,
have kids and they
yeah,
inculcate all that into that kid, so now suddenly that kid starts off so far removed from
that's right.
something, from like a purified channel,
Yeah, right.
that it's like scraping yourself back out of hell is like a disaster.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, but I mean, see, so look, there are two things that come as a consequence of that. The first thing is if you are in the position where you need to build it yourself, when you earn it, the feeling that you get is that there is nothing that can happen to you that can take this thing away.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's true is that it takes a lot longer to do it yourself, but what you get in return is that it's really you,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know? And the thing that's great about that, the thing that's tough about it, but the thing that's great about it is that when it's really you and not a confluence of others, then the connections, the relationships, and the life that you have will be more authentic
Yes.
and uh, I think better.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
better. I mean,
And
harder for sure, but definitely I think better.
and one thing that I don't think that we pointed out yet was, I wanted to point out the fact that I didn't bring up the Theseus ship that was supposed to be said at the beginning, or maybe I did. I don't know. But
No,
the
I mean,
this is a good reason why I want to bring this up, which
yeah,
is that I talk about the idea of a spirit, and how you program the universe, how you're programmed by the universe,
mm,
and this idea that when you are alive, you have your physical energy and matter that makes up your body, your physical form,
mm,
and and over time that energy and matter gets replaced. We make the same argument in the episode spirits and waveforms, and so that energy and matter gets replaced over time, which
mm,
means that when that gets replaced, there's something that persists that's not made of that particular physical energy and matter that persists, that you can say I am. And so what I'm saying is that when those things are replaced, they're not replaced all at once. They're replaced over time. And so it's almost like there's a field or a waveform that's telling the matter how to interact, such that it takes a specific configuration. And that configuration is associated, like the nomentation without representation principle, season 1, episode 3. The nomentation without representation principle says that for every mental state or state of being, there's a physical configuration that corresponds with that. And as you're listening to us communicate to you, you are traveling in the space of configurations, or and there's a direct relationship between your space of physical configurations that you travel through and the states of being or spirits you embody. And so the point to that is the thing that persists, like the Theseus ship, which is replacing all the parts of a ship, but then is it the same ship at the end of the day, is is related to identity, because those waveforms that are embodied, that put your physical configuration to hold the memory so that you can do calculus, can be placed on any person. And because of that, every single, think of the spirit that can do calculus as one of these macro identities. It's an identity of self. I am that spirit that can do that. And because you see that spirit in other people, because that spirit can be embodied in other people, then you can see the self in the other people who embody that spirit. And this is the point, what I'm trying to say, with this archetype, that we all come together in this social contract, in this community that houses the spirit together. And it's important because once you understand that these waveforms or fields or whatever that can be placed on different matter are associated with your sense of identity, um, then it allows you to think of your identity beyond something like a local, like insular self. You think of it more broadly, more connected to others. I don't know if that's, I don't know. That's one thing I wanted to point out.
Right. So the okay. So if I've heard you correctly, or if I'm understanding you correctly, I mean, I understand the construction you built,
Yeah.
but what I'm trying to extract out is the reason that you want to emphasize this is because part of understanding the nature of identity
Yes.
also requires us to understand the extent to which, or the degree to which, or the manner in which the identity is something that we are entering into, and so
Mm-hmm.
consequently is like a shared or global thing,
Yes, yes.
right?
So
So
in
it's
other
not
words,
it's
you
not
can
merely
literally,
in that thing. It's not just this,
yeah.
but it's like this. It's out here too,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I mean, so Jordan
And
Peterson
wait,
makes,
to the degree to which you can actually see someone else and see that is myself, and
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
something,
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
something you say. It's like if you can literally embody the feeling that that is literally me right there.
yeah,
That is me.
yeah,
That's the way in which you can say something like I did that.
yeah,
Because think
sure,
about it, like the spirit of this is why I always try to tell people, the spirit of calculus and physics and mathematics that I've come in relationship to, I don't see them as objects. I see them as literal spirits that speak to me,
sure,
that I'm in relationship with.
yeah, sure, sure.
And when you actually truly find yourself in a state of being
Hmm.
in
Yeah,
which you see yourself as like, I'm literally this thing, literally, like you like, just as much as you say I am Shannon or I am whoever is listening to this, imagine you actually being in a state where you're like, I am this thing.
yeah, yeah. I think that that can actually end up being the basis for the type of divine and brotherly love that we are called to in Christianity. Because if you, I mean, I think that that's true. So what? Okay, so let me clarify that like as follows. So you can imagine working with a particular spirit, and then that facilitating the perception that you are like other people of that same spirit.
Yeah.
For example, with physicists. But then if you take the unity of all such processes, then you can start to look at other people as being kindred by virtue of the fact that they are connected to spirit. And this is the nature of the Holy Spirit, right? And in the manner in which we are all brothers and sisters,
Yes.
then we can understand each other as true kin and sons and daughters of God, capital G, God.
Yes. Yes.
And so consequently, we can love each other in the way that, say, Christ calls us to.
Yes. Exactly. And this is when I'm reading the Bible. This is how it's being filtered and processed through my mind,
Yeah,
because I was an atheist who worshipped truth and science and reason. And then
yeah,
I started reading this honestly and sincerely.
yeah,
And I'm like, this sounds like what it's saying. Like, am I understanding this properly? But then you actually read it and you're like, no, this actually sounds correct.
yeah.
And and so and so the idea is, then you start going to, so now we start going to the
I mean, it's
mathematics
because it
of it.
is correct. So
Yeah. Well, you never. Well, that's the thing. If you never want to be too sure about your own interpretation, right? You have to check your math with other people
no,
and
no,
all
no, not
that. But
interpretation. No, but yeah,
yeah. Well, so now you can start thinking of it as, so think of it as each one of these are these macro states.
yeah,
Think of that as the conserved quantity in a symmetry transformation. And
yeah,
then
sure,
think that every time you transform between elements of the elements within the group symmetry or whatever, every time you
yeah,
transform between one or the other, that's a different micro identity.
yeah,
That's the difference between the macro information that's conserved, is that I'm a physicist and you're a physicist, and then the micro data is that I'm Shannon and that you are Ryan. And what that means is that this distinction that distinguishes Shannon from Ryan is all of the other macro identity intersections that make up me versus what makes up you. But for the information physicists, we during a symmetry transformation, that information is preserved to the degree to which you and I are both in a sincere relationship with that spirit, which we both are. So what that does is, you can think of it now as this archetype as being a manifold, like yeah, it's being like a manifold. When you're and when you're mapping from one to the other, that you, Shannon, is a point on that manifold. But then, because of all the other intersection identities, you are
yeah, yeah,
also
yeah,
a point on all these other manifolds.
yeah, sure, sure.
And this, and so now you can do a symmetry transformation with some other preserved quantity, and now you can see how you're seamlessly moving from one identity to the next.
Yeah,
And it's the degree to which everyone has purified themselves and are in sincere relationship with all of their identities, that
yeah,
you have this possibility to seamlessly and algebraically move between all these different manifolds. And
yeah,
because they're all connected, they are all one object. I have been trying to communicate this to people for so long.
yeah, sure, sure.
And
So then, wait, so hold on. So then that means that basically what you can do, so you start with a total space, and in some sense, what you can do is you can take slices, and the
yes.
slices that you take are basically, let me choose a different base manifold that I'm building everything over. And the
Mm-hmm.
different base manifolds that you choose are going to be based upon which spirit you want to choose, right? So
Yes.
if I want to take the physicist slice, then I can think about the total space as living as a bundle over the physicist slice. Then I can
Yes.
take sections and then move in the fibers and then take a different slice
Yes.
along
Yes.
some other type, like mathematician, and then you can see different representations
Yes.
of the total space. Okay, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. And that's the whole point, is that then, so now what you see is that when you look at
So,
the
sorry.
overlap, I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
Let me say one other thing that's very, very important.
Yeah.
Um, it's very interesting that you make this type of construction because the thing that I am building is more or less like the thing that you have specified is more or less the thing that I'm building. I
Yes.
mean, there are some caveats, but it's essentially the same idea, which is very interesting that's how it's shaking up to be. I mean, there are some details that we would have
Yes.
to. It's not worth getting into right now, but it's the basic intuition um, is essentially there, which is
Well,
you know,
that's why in the previous episode, the first episode of the fourth season that we just recorded, I start off with like, what was it like? How did you feel when you met me?
yeah,
And the point is that it's essentially, the point is that what you've just communicated is like, oh, you're making the same construction. It's the overlap.
yeah,
I see you in me. You are me. I am you.
yeah,
And and I know from our discussions, the difference between you and I is, I like to think more conceptually. I think at a lower resolution, and I think that's a benefit. I want to think at a lower resolution because,
yeah,
for one, I'm not the most I'm analytically competent enough to be where I'm at as a physicist. So I'm very
Sure.
analytically sound, but it
Yeah.
takes a lot of computational power. I like to think conceptually. And
Yeah.
so when I think about my construction that I gave, my construction is motivated by my research on the differential geometric approach to quantum ignorance consistent with entropic properties statistical mechanics, where this is my interaction with quantum entropy, where I introduced a new notion of quantum entropy
Yeah.
or quantum uncertainty. I
Yeah.
found this fiber bundle structure. I used the Lie group symmetries to generate the set of purifications, and and so my structures are associated with this particular fiber bundle structure. But the essence of it is the ability to glue another space on a point of a base manifold, and that's what the fibers are. But for you, you want to generalize because you think more analytically, more technically, so you want to generalize. So I know that whatever I've constructed is a very specific manifestation of something that is invariant between us or
Yeah.
covariant between us.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
the essence of the thing, it's like I've taken the actual construction and I'm using this particular example to express the essence that is independent of the example that's used. And this is exactly what I mean when I talk about identifying with the macro data, because as a particular physicist,
Yeah.
I am a particular manifestation of the spirit. And so
Yeah.
to say that this particular person it captures the entire thing is arrogant. You're the
Yeah.
whole thing. What an arrogant thing to say. But
Well,
the
this
the
is what we were talking about earlier, right?
yes,
Yeah.
but the point is that I think you have the right to say this. One, if you sincerely have had that experience of thinking that is me. Two, you have been acting in accordance with the will of that spirit, and you've been acting sincerely, honestly, and faithfully and truthfully, and such that it communicates to you, you have the authority to speak on my behalf. And the thing is that if it were the case that all the physicists died tomorrow and I was the only one left and the rest of the world had to rely on someone to be a representative of that spirit, they'd be idiotic not to choose me. And this is what I've been trying to say this entire time is that this realm, because I am a physicist and a mathematician and a scientist, I have a particular way of processing data. I have a particular sight, a particular language, a particular vision that allows me to read and write data in a way that people who do not have the spirit cannot do. And so if you are someone, if tomorrow you were thrown into math world and or physics world, and it was and your ability to read and write on that world was a difference as to whether or not you lived or died, and I came along with like, hey, I'll be your guide. You like to like for you in that world, you have no spirit, you are a speck. For me,
Yeah.
I would be a god to you. Are you kidding me? And then the point is that it's like, well, look at all like in the hierarchy of physics, I'm nobody. No physicist really knows who I am, but I have published with Fields medalists. I have I have gotten papers that were editor's choice in prestigious journals. Like I am a powerful spirit in this world, and and these spirits are trying to communicate themselves through me. They want you to come in relationship with them. That is the goal of this podcast.
Yeah.
This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give you my spirit and my soul so that you can see with my sight.
Yeah.
I don't know how else more clearly to say it. I don't know if people who listen to the podcast are really connecting the dots, but I'm trying my best to communicate this to you. And I look at all the sacrifice I've made, and I'm not even confused at all. Like, and you can, if you anyone questions it, just look at my works of art. Like, for goodness sake, can you write the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm? No way, no way in hell. I am who I say I am. This is sincere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that oh, no, that's notes that I had.
Yeah.
Um No, I think that this outlines nicely the first of all the sense in which um, identity enters into the thing that we're trying to build, and second of all, which shows
Murphy, shush.
objective ethics are contingent upon notion of identity.
Oh
I
yeah,
think, yeah, I mean, I think that this is I mean, I think this is a great place probably to stop. I think
yeah.
that it lays the foundation for where we're trying to go quite nicely.
Yes, perfect. Yes, and yes, and so we talked a lot about ethics today, but I have a formal construction of it based off of this, and it is just, and like again, people need to understand that in this current form of who I am and why I believe in the Bible, it is the case that I've constructed a cognitive schemata, a worldview, and then I read the Bible and I find the truths that I discovered already there all the time. And so when I look at this idea of ethics, to me, the solution to ethics is literally the fact that we are made in the image of God, that principle, and Jesus' first command and his second command. Those three things together make the entirety of ethics, all of it. And I am making a claim that this is the objective ethics. And anyone and the idea is that if anyone disagrees with me when we make the argument in the next episode, my guess is that anything they do to perturb that will actually just demonstrate a desire to control and dominate others. I
Right.
don't think that it's possible to perturb. I think it's a global minimum.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, I understand.
and the podcast itself is something like a global minimum to the truth. But I know as a person who wrote optimization, because my PhD, you can actually break it down into two optimization problems, and it's a good initial guess. When you're optimizing, you need to have a good initial guess, or having a good initial guess really improves your ability to solve the problem. And so what
Yeah,
this is that it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes, but it's a good initial guess to the
yeah,
correct answer to the global minimum.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I think um, so. You can There are things you can do to verify that hypothesis. Not you. I mean, there are things one can do to verify that hypothesis. Like something that happens to me regularly, especially when I'm working on something that I have a natural intuition for, is that I'll be reading something by somebody who everyone agrees is a great writer, or something like that, like
yeah,
something by Jung or something, right? And
yeah.
then in the margins, I will write, this implies such and such. And then
Yeah.
a paragraph later, or three paragraphs later, or the next page, he says the exact same thing that I said. Right.
Yes.
That tells you like you really are understanding exactly what's going on because you can
Yep.
see the inferential
Yep.
structure immediately unfolding before you. So
You can
when
predict the
your
future.
right, so when your thoughts and your perspective and the things you're building are more in line with people
Yes.
who everyone agrees are incredibly intelligent, and it keeps happening over and over
Yes.
and over and
Yes.
over again,
Yes.
then it's a very good indication that you're going in the correct direction.
Dude, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell people. It's like I'm sorry, go ahead.
Especially so, especially if the overlap is across multiple fields. So
Yes.
if you notice that your mode of thought conforms to mathematics, physics, psychology, Christianity, then you,
Buddhism.
yeah, or whatever,
Mm,
it's more and more. I mean, we always need to be careful to make sure we're not projecting,
yeah.
but if you keep seeing the same patterns over and over and over and over again, and you are taking a lot of care to be as conscientious as possible to ensure that you aren't deluding yourself,
Yes.
then it's very good evidence to suggest that the thing you're thinking is pointing in the correct direction.
Exactly. And that's
You might
exactly
go and talk to people and they come to the same exact conclusions as you.
yes.
You guys
Yes.
have been working in isolation for 30 or
Yes.
40 years.
That's what it was like meeting you.
Yeah.
And the thing is that's what it was like meeting you, but you're like the sixth person or seventh person. You know what I mean? And
No,
it's to the point where I communicate these ideas to people, and everyone, no matter where they're at in their life or what their specific training are or whatever, they're like, "That's just this. That's just this." And it's like, how many times do I have to get the feedback where I'm like, "Okay, I'm confident. I have the correct answer." Like at this point, it almost like if God was trying to tell you, "Hey, man, hey,
and,
do this thing," and you're like, "Oh, he never showed me any evidence. What should I do next?" And it's like,
and you,
dude.
Yeah,
What more
show.
do you have to be shown?
What do you mean? We've already showed you the miracles. Like,
There's a certain point where you're just like, okay, yeah, I got the right answer. Like I'm not crazy.
right, exactly. Yeah,
And
and the thing is, I think if you have a disposition to be, I don't know, maybe paranoid about that, it can take a long time to get to the
yes,
point where you have enough confidence. Because
yes,
first of all, you know the thing that you're working on is insanely complicated, so it takes a long time to get to the point where you feel like you're sufficiently masterful at the thing. And
yeah,
then on top of that, the people, when you're working on something like that, the people that can verify your sanity also need to put in that level of time and effort just to be able to have a meaningful conversation with you
yeah,
at the level of detail that's
yes,
necessary to tell
yes,
you you're not stupid,
yes, yes,
right?
yes,
So it takes a long time. I mean, like I, I can say that I probably started thinking about these things seriously when I was maybe 18 or 20, and now I'm 30. So
yeah,
it takes like maybe 10 years to get to the point
yeah.
where you can actually competently do these things. You know what I mean? That's the nature of the game.
And it's like for it's like okay, it's like I have a PhD in theoretical physics. I did my PhD in general relativity. I've published in the field of computational geometry and quantum. It's like all right, there's a certain degree with like all right. One of the reasons why I got into this is because it's a highly revered field that's considered complicated. And I wanted to. I always had some complex about being stupid. And I wanted to prove I wasn't. I think I've done it now. And then
Yeah,
also on top of that, when one thing my sister told
bro.
me, what's that?
Come at me, bro. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm ready, man. It's funny. I always use the analogy that when I played Dark Souls for the first time, I grinded for so long that when I fought the first boss, I could wield one of those massive swords with one hand, and I killed the boss in like two slices.
Yeah,
Because and like so, think of it that way. Like I'm such a coward that I have checked my math so many times at this point that I'm
yeah,
so certain that I'm correct that I'm pretty sure I can decimate anyone who tries to come at me. And
yeah,
I want to prove it. I want to actually play that game. Come at me, like seriously. And wherever I'm wrong, who cares? I sacrifice wherever I'm wrong to the spirit of truth. I don't care. And so one of the things is that my sister, she is what do you call it? A market manager for Bank of America. She's an impressive person. Like my
mhm,
goodness, she's an impressive person. And I remember one time she gave me some advice, and she said that Shannon, you have to trust the trust that people put in you that are around you. So when you're looking at your colleagues, when you're looking at your mentors, do they trust you? Do they think you're smart? Do they respect you? Well, you have to like trust that.
yes,
And my advisor, he was a student of John Wheeler. So like in terms of my academic lineage, my one of my academic uncles would be Richard Feynman. You know what I mean? Like that's the lineage that I have. And my advisor is a brilliant guy,
mhm,
and I respect him. My advisor after I left grad school as a postdoc, Paul Alsing, is also insanely brilliant. And these people, like we like when I'm trying to figure out who I am and what I've accomplished, where I'm at, when these people start respecting you, like Howard Blair too, when these
yeah,
people start respecting you and you can hear them and you can start having these back and forth, it's like you've made
yeah,
it. Like you're somewhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think the thing that's great about that is that uh, the thing that's hard about it at first, but the thing that's also great about it is that when you first come into it, it's difficult to tell the difference between somebody who is an asshole and somebody who genuinely cares about trying to make sure that you don't corrupt the spirit,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But once, if you are willing to be humble, when you get to this space where you have sufficient command over it, you realize why they are the way they are because the thing is difficult.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. Yes.
when I first met Ed, he was exactly like that with me, and I mean, he should be, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's also because he's had so many different students come to him and be like, "I'm interested in quantum mechanics," and then they don't know what the hell they're doing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but
All right.
anyways,
We
these are
should go.
I
Yeah.
can hear,
You can hear Veritas.
yeah, I understand,
The
but
bomb
yeah,
has dropped.
right, exactly. But I mean, I
Uh,
think that this is a great place for us to end, and
Yeah.
really
So do
clear.
I.
But yeah,
Yeah, man.
so
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan, for coming and doing this with me. I look forward to finishing out the rest of the season, and by the end of it, you guys, we will have the objective truth of ethics and the objective truth of evil. And anyone who disagrees, I think, will reveal themselves to be not doing good things.
so we solved God in life, no problem.
No problem, man.
Easy.
All right.
After work.
What'd you say?
I said it's just a work of an afternoon, no problem.
Yeah. Well, just a part, whatever that the saying is. Like, anyway. But all right. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Bottom Throw Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray. This is my guest Ryan Scott, and stay turtling, my friend. Peace.